The empty ship. The sky was blue everywhere. The pale blue spread of the sky, decorated with wisps of white like feathers torn from the tail of a swan, and the blue-black gunmetal ocean, rippled by the gentle northerly wind, and here and there spangled with light as the small waves caught and flashed back the afternoon sun. The time was 2 o'clock. Captain Morehouse walked backwards and forwards across the De Gracia's narrow poop. Now and again he teased the hair of his thick brown beard. Sometimes he glanced upwards at the white array of the brig's sails. They were making about 4 knots, which was not, perhaps, as fast as he would have liked. But how could a man grumble? The winds had been favourable all the way from New York. It had been a good trip so far, and, within a day or so, they would have sailed out of the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean. It was now December 4th. By Christmas, they would be secured snugly alongside a quay, waiting for a new cargo, and with plenty of time in which to enjoy themselves. He turned to the second mate, who was on watch beside the wheel. "What's our position?" he asked. 3820 north, 1715 west, skipper," the man said. "We're well to the north of Santa Maria." As if he hoped to see the island, which is the most southeasterly of the Azores group, the captain regarded the horizon. There was nothing on the sharp line which separated the dark blue sea from the light blue sky. Santa Maria was tucked away beneath it, invisible. Captain Morehouse's eyes, as if setting off on a voyage, began to follow the line, and then, suddenly, they stopped. "Hand me the glass, please, mister," he said. The second mate passed him the telescope. For several moments the captain regarded the smallest of specks, trying, as it were, to drag out the details from something which was too far away to have any identity. He beckoned to the second mate. "Come over here," he said. "Take a look." And, presently, "What do you make of it? It's a ship, all right. A brigantine, I'd say." "Huh," Captain Morehouse grunted his agreement. Before very long, it became clear that the two vessels were drawing closer to each other. The black speck assumed shape and then, gradually, details. Unlike the De Gratia, she had only 2 sails set on the foremast, and there seemed to be something wrong with her rigging. Captain Morehouse was puzzled. "Strange," he muttered, and "odd," and "I don't seem to understand." "Looks as if she's had a rough passage," the second mate offered. "Yes, and then again, no. There's damage, I'll agree, but nothing which couldn't be put to rights. And then, do you know, I have the impression there's no one on deck. Look again, through the glass, and see what you think." The second mate looked. "No," he said, "nobody on deck. There's not even a man at the wheel. It's the oddest darn thing." Captain Morehouse beckoned to one of the sailors. "My compliments to Mr. Devoe," he said, "and ask him to join us on deck." Mr. Devoe was the first mate of the De Gratia. He had been on watch for a large part of the night, and now he was asleep in his cabin. But, as he emerged from the companionway and onto the poop, nobody would have guessed this. His eyes were alert, and there was no suggestion of fatigue in his brisk walk. "Something the matter, skipper?" he asked. "Nothing the matter. Something peculiar. Take a look at that vessel over there." Mr. Devoe looked, and breathed a whistle of surprise. "I guess there must be a crew on board," he said, with an uncertain smile, "but they must be drunk. Nobody's sailing that ship. She's sailing herself." The captain gave a brief order to the helmsman. "We'll get within a hailing distance," he said, "and see whom we can rouse." As they drew closer, more details became apparent, and most of them confirmed the earlier impressions. Something, most certainly, was wrong. At least 2 of the sails had obviously been blown away, and another was hanging from a stay in a manner that no sail made by man was ever intended to hang. The deck was deserted, and it looked as if the compass had been damaged. "Get all men on deck," Morehouse told the mate, and "Heave to." He cupped his hands to his mouth and called across the water, "Ahoy there! Ahoy there!" There was no reply. The strange vessel continued crab-like on her uncertain course, unaware of everything around her. When all the sailors were assembled, Captain Morehouse again addressed the mate. "Take Mr. Wright and one other man, lower the longboat and go over and board her. I'm not at all happy about what I see." He paused and then smiled. "Or maybe I am. It could be that we're about to make ourselves some money." "Salvage?" the mate asked. "It's a possibility, mister," the captain said. "Get over there as fast as you can." The two mates and a seaman climbed into the boat. With a rattle of the running gear, the craft dropped the few feet from the deck to the sea. They unhitched her and got the oars out. With strong, smooth strokes, they rowed beneath the counter of the mysterious vessel's stern towards the far side. The name and port of registration were painted in bold white letters. She came, it seemed, from New York. Her name was Mary Celeste. We must now go back to November 4th, 1872, just over a month before Captain Morehouse had sighted the brigantine, and the two mates of the Dei Gratia had set off on their short trip in the longboat. It was a crisp day in early winter, with frost in the air, and the usual bustle of activity on Pier 30 in New York's East River. The Mary Celeste was loading a cargo of 1,700 casks of alcohol for Genoa. The first mate, Albert G. Richardson, was in charge of operations on deck. Down in the saloon, the brigantine's master, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, was studying the list of his crew. Among them were 4 German seamen. 3 of them came from the Frisian Islands, and Captain Briggs knew them by reputation. They were quiet, steady men, good workers and not given to troublemaking. The 4th, Gottschalk, was unknown to him. This was to be Captain Briggs' first voyage in the Mary Celeste. He was a man of 37, sturdily built and with a carefully trimmed black beard and moustache. Previously, he had commanded a schooner and then, briefly, a bark. His present ship had originally been owned by a Nova Scotia firm which had named her the Amazon. Now she belonged to a partnership of 4 people, in which Briggs owned 8 of the 24 shares. While Captain Briggs was doing his paperwork, his wife, Sarah, was fussing over their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. A voyage to the Mediterranean in winter was something to be enjoyed, and Mrs. Briggs was looking forward enormously to a few days in Genoa. She also hoped to bring a woman's sense of domestic orderliness to life in the Mary Celeste saloon. She had brought her sewing machine with her, and, for the Briggs family was fond of music, a small organ, no bigger than an upright piano, called a melodeon. "It will be nice, Ben," she had told her husband. "We can have some songs on the trip, and that will pass the time." Captain Briggs had agreed that it would indeed be pleasant. "Now," she said, "it was good of Mr. Richardson to have the melodeon put on board so carefully. I declare there's not so much as a scratch on it." Yes, Sarah," Captain Briggs muttered. He had other things on his mind. The Mary Celeste had just undergone a complete refit, which was all to the good, for she had been in bad shape when he took her over. But even now she was not complete. The melodeon might have been loaded satisfactorily, but some lout of a docker had damaged the longboat. There was no time in which to carry out the necessary repairs, and it would have to be left behind. This meant that the Mary Celeste would only have 1 boat on board for the trip, an 18-foot yawl which was normally carried on davits across the stern. Briggs hauled himself out of his chair and went on deck. "All going okay, Bert?" he said to the mate. "All going okay. I've told them to be especially careful of the alcohol. In a wooden ship like this, it could be dangerous. If it caught on fire, there'd be nothing left of the Mary Celeste." I know what you mean. Still, we should make a profit on this trip. Richardson, who was related to the firm's senior partner by marriage, saw the sense of this. I'm going to stow the yawl on top of the main hatch, he said. Does that suit you? That'll be fine, Captain Briggs said. By the following day, the vessel was ready for sea. The hatches had been carefully battened down. The yawl was lashed in position. Escorted by a tug, the Mary Celeste edged away from the pier and drifted downriver on the tide to Staten Island. From his position in the stern, Captain Briggs looked with dislike at the lowering November sky. The water round about was being torn up into white tatters by a strong headwind. No good trying to sail against this, Bert, he said to the mate. We'd be wasting our time and getting extremely uncomfortable into the bargain. Have them drop anchor. We'll wait until the wind changes. They had to wait for 2 days, but the time passed pleasantly enough. In the evening, Mrs. Briggs played her melodeon, and one of the German seamen taught her some of the songs they sing in the Frisian Islands. When, on the morning of November 7th, Captain Briggs came up on deck, he found things much more to his liking. The wind had backed round to the west, which was where it should have been in the first place. All hands on deck, he told the mate. Let's get some sail on her. The sooner we're under way, the sooner we'll make Genoa. The seamen worked quickly. The great fields of white canvas unfolded. With a succession of jerks, the rope stretched tight. The sails filled. A dribble of white foam at the Mary Celeste bow became a triumphant plume. Gathering speed rapidly, the small sailing ship headed southeastwards on a course for the Azores, Cape St. Vincent, Gibraltar, and thence to Genoa. If it stays like this, we'll make good time, Captain Briggs remarked. For the next 17 days, the moody and cruelly impartial fates which governed the lives of men at sea were well disposed to the Mary Celeste and her crew. On November 24th, they sighted the Azores, after no incidents, but Captain Briggs was not happy. I don't like the look of the glass, Bert, he told the mate. His companion shook his head. I know, he said, it's falling fast. If the mercury in the barometer was falling, the wind was doing the opposite. By nightfall, it had worked itself up into a moderate gale. The sky was dark, with sheets of rain hammering the deck, and the ocean built itself up from a series of small hummocks into hills, and then into mountains. Mary Celeste was flying along at 9 knots, but this could not be allowed to continue. With such a high wind pressing itself against the sails, something, eventually, would break. The sails themselves might be torn away, or it could be worse. Ships have sometimes had their masts snapped into pieces by gales, and Captain Briggs was afraid this might happen to the Mary Celeste. Lower the main and take in the royals and topgallants, he yelled to the mate. By royals and topgallants he was referring to the square sails at the head of the foremast. Come on, lads, lively now, Mr. Richardson called. The crewmen scrambled up the mast, cutting their hands on the wet rigging, which was stretched tight and seemed as hard as steel. They got the sails in and regained the deck. Throughout the night, Captain Briggs remained on deck. His wife brought him cups of coffee, and, on each visit, she nervously asked, "Will it be all right, Ben?" "Sure, it'll be all right," her husband said. "How's Sophia?" The little girl, improbably enough, was fast asleep. In his heart, Captain Briggs was less happy, as if the wind and the rain and the wild bucking of the Mary Celeste as she fought the big seas, as if these were not enough. There was another hazard. Somewhere ahead of them was the island of Santa Maria, a lonely chunk of rock-fringed land in the middle of the ocean, with no lighthouses to warn mariners that it was there. The thick overcast of the storm made it impossible to check their position by the stars. Captain Briggs could do nothing more than hope that his dead reckoning was right, and that they were a safe distance away from the island. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the wind dropped a little, and a white, watery sun did its best to pierce the clouds in the east. In the grey half-light, Richardson was studying the horizon ahead through his telescope. Suddenly he cried, "There she is, dead ahead!" He pointed to a smudge of land about 15 miles away. "Steer northeast by north," Captain Briggs snapped the change of course to the helmsman. Then, "Where's that damned coffee?" His eyes were edged with red, and his face, pale after the long night of discomfort and anxiety, was deeply etched with lines. "Northeast by north it is," the helmsman acknowledged. Later, they had breakfast, and at 8 o'clock, Richardson took a bearing on Santa Maria, which was now abeam. "Eastern Point bears south-southwest 6 miles distant," he noted in the log. It was the final entry. From that moment onwards, nothing more is known of what happened on board the Mary Celeste, nothing of what befell the crew, Miss Briggs and the small girl who was aboard her. The longboat from the Dei Gratia came alongside the brigantine. The seaman clambered up on deck and made a rope fast. The 2 mates followed him. Devoe called again, "Ahoy, Mary Celeste, who's on board?" But there was no answer. "We'd better have a look around," he told the others. As they had expected, 2 sails had been blown away. The fore-royal and the fore-topgallant were neatly furled, but 2 of the other sails were missing, and a 3rd had broken loose. The rigging was fouled up. The compass had been knocked from its position on top of the cabin and was lying smashed on the deck. One of the hatch covers had been blown off, and the ship's boat was missing. "Quite a mess," Devoe said. "Let's take a look below." They searched every corner of the Mary Celeste and could not find a living soul on board her. The cabin skylight was raised, and this had let water in. A clock on the bulkhead had stopped, and the captain's bed was unmade. Everywhere there was the feel and smell of moisture. The hatch over the galley had been removed, and there was a foot of water inside. But this was as far as the chaos went. The pots and pans had all been washed up and put away in their correct places. This may have been a sign of the house-proud influence of Mrs. Briggs, though if it was, it seemed strange that her husband's bed had not been made. Devoe and his companions returned to the deck. By one of the hatches, they found a sounding rod, which suggested that someone had been measuring the depth of water in the hold. To satisfy himself, Devoe used the rod himself and found that it amounted to just over 3 feet. For a wooden hull, which is bound to let a certain amount in, and has to be pumped out daily, this was not bad. Certainly it was not sufficient to cause any captain in his right mind to abandon ship. And yet that, to judge by the absence of anyone on board and the missing boat, was what must have happened. Devoe clambered down into the hold to examine the cargo. It was all in good order and properly stowed. "I just can't make it out," he said. "Can you see anything I've missed?" he asked the second mate. But the gentleman could only answer, "No." "Right, let's get back to our own ship." Captain Morehouse listened attentively to his officer's reports. "We'll take her into Gibraltar," he said. "You, Mr. Devoe, take Seaman Anderson and Lund with you. Get over there and make everything ship-shape. We'll stay by you. Let us know when you're ready to make sail." It took 3 hours to clear the accumulation of water, and 2 days to repair the rigging and get sail on her. On December 13th, after a trip in which there was no trouble, and in which no more clues had come to light, Gibraltar was sighted. A few hours later, the 2 ships anchored in the harbour. The British authorities took over the Mary Celeste and informed Captain Morehouse that he and his crew must remain on hand until the mystery of this strange ship had been cleared up. Fortunately, they relented later on, for otherwise these reluctant guests would have been there for the rest of their lives. The mystery of the Mary Celeste was never cleared up. Naturally, there was an inquiry. Devoe, who was the chief witness, was cross-examined over and over again. No, He had no idea how the water had got into the galley. Yes, it was surprising that the skylight over the cabin had been left open. No, he had seen no signs of anything which might have suggested that any violence had taken place. "I would like to remind you of this weapon," the counsel for the British government said, and here he held up an old sword which had been found in Captain Briggs' cabin. There were stains on the blade. "Think carefully, Mr. Devoe. Does this not suggest violence?" "I saw no signs of anything like that," the mate said. He was telling the truth. When the sword was examined more carefully, it transpired that the stains were not caused by blood. Was there any evidence of a fire or an explosion having taken place? Remember, her cargo was alcohol. There was no such evidence. The surveyor of shipping examined the brigantine, and his report was much the same as Devoe's. There seemed to be no good reason why the forehatch and the galley should have been forced off, and nothing to account for the smashed compass. Nor was there any suggestion that, after the rough night which they had endured before Richardson made the last entry in the log, the weather had worsened. In fact, it had improved. Every trail of investigation led to a dead end. As Horatio Sprague, the United States consul in Gibraltar at the time, was forced to tell his government, there was absolutely no explanation why the crew should have abandoned an apparently sound ship in perfectly reasonable weather. The search for a solution to the mystery of the Mary Celeste did not end with the adjournment of the Court of Inquiry. On and off ever since, men of imagination have been trying to work out an answer. They have ranged from the somewhat far-fetched idea that the whole thing was a figment of the imagination, a complicated confidence trick, and that the Mary Celeste as such never existed at all. This was no doubt based upon the fact that there was some technical irregularity about the way in which the ship was registered. It is ingenious, but is hardly worth serious attention. There was a theory that, no matter what the stains on the sword blade might suggest to the contrary, there really had been violence on board, that the sailors had mutinied and slaughtered the officers and Captain Briggs' wife and daughter, and then made off in the boat. But, if this was so, they must have been very tidy mutineers, for they left everything in perfect order. Just before the First World War, some papers turned up in North London. They belonged to a man who claimed to be the sole survivor of the Mary Celeste. His name had never been entered on the crew manifesto, for the simple reason that, although he had travelled with the consent of Captain Briggs, he had, to all other intents and purposes, been a stowaway. According to his story, Briggs had attempted to swim around the ship fully clothed. Others had joined him in the water, while the rest of the crew had watched from a small platform that had been rigged up as a playground for the Briggs' daughter. The platform gave way under their combined weight. They all fell into the water and were presently eaten by sharks. By some miracle, the spinner of that impossible yarn had clung on to a piece of timber, and a good few days later had been washed up on the coast of North Africa. Less fantastic were theories that the seepage of alcohol from the barrels had caused Captain Briggs to fear an imminent explosion, that he had expected his ship to go aground on the rocks of Santa Maria, and that the ship had been hit by a waterspout, which might very well have ripped off the hatches and have accounted for the water in the hold and galley. Certainly the measuring rod suggests that Captain Briggs had been worried about the amount of water on board. Perhaps he overestimated the peril from this source, and believed that his vessel was in immediate danger of foundering, in which case he might have ordered the ship to be abandoned. But then, in the boat, he and his companions must have seen that, in fact, there had been no peril at all, and as they struggled to return to her, a puff of wind must have filled the brigantine's sails, and as they worked frantically to catch up, they must have seen their one hope of rescue sailing unattended beyond their reach. That must have been the awful irony of the unsolved mystery of the Mary Celeste, for the boat in which presumably they misguidedly sought safety turned out to be their coffin. No signs of it were ever found. The crew of the Mary Celeste certainly died at sea. The reason will never be known.